recap of her career included this. After regularly guest hosting the Johnny Carson show for years, when she started her own talk show, Carson never spoke to her again. That's one story. Now the second one, I don't know if it's true, but one biography of Walter Payton. His life has Mike Singletary privately confronting Walter over his partying, womanizing, exhorting him as a family man and a man of God to stop. Although Singletary could see in the plain window's reflection that tears streamed down both sides of Walter's face, the book says that Payton never spoke to Singletary again. Some of our families or circles of friends could have similar stories. Someone does something or says something that upsets someone else. Either that ends all relationship, or an attempt to reach out and get someone back on the straight and narrow blows up in her or his face. People are funny, aren't they? Conflict resolution. Conflict resolution can be hard and sticky work. Reconciliation involves risk. It is a risk. It is hard and sticky work that Jesus tells the church not to avoid. If you love one another as you commanded us to love one another like you loved us, then in love you and I are to try and be reconciled with each other when there is a major rift. It's part of our Christian witness. It's part of a community. It's part of an active, not a passive love. Now, if you're like me, when someone hurts you, the temptation often is to retreat. Matthew 18 is addressed to the church of Jesus Christ. So when someone in the church hurts us, or as we heard Annie read, if another member of the church sins against you, we may be likewise tempted to just let it lie. Leave. Pretend to forget it. Drop the person like Johnny Carson, although not so dramatically. To this approach of conflict within the church, Jesus says, no. Now some words of clarification are needed. We are not talking about someone hurting our feelings by an unfortunate choice of words. We are not talking about someone forgetting to do something that we really were counting on them for. We're not talking about getting into an argument. The word we heard was sins. My favorite commentator on Matthew, Frederick Bruner, said this about the words sins against you. He said, "It is not Christian to let a member of our congregation run rampant over other people or moral norms. Only clear sin, which is only behavior clearly and consistently contrary to Jesus' commands, is confrontable. Only what Scripture calls sin is sin, nothing else." And he quotes Martin Luther, helpfully. Luther said, of course, the Holy Christian Church has weaknesses in her too. Yet she does not sin willingly or with malice against God and His Word. So we are talking about things that are more or less obvious, at least to the person who is sinned against, if not the whole community. He's not talking about something minor. Jesus doesn't talk about small potatoes. If you read the words of Christ in the Gospels, nothing is minor. It's all important stuff. And so this is something that's worth talking about, not something that's not a personal slight, or something that really maybe being quiet is the wisest choice of action about. So Bruner continued talking about what is it sins against us, or sins against you. In context, he wrote, the sin of which Matthew's brother here is apparently guilty is the sin of scandal. That is, of deliberately hurting the faith of other Christians by teaching or living unrepentantly and shamelessly contrary to God's clear word and command. Now, this is believer to believer, Jesus is talking about, not believer to unbelieving neighbor who is doing something perceived to be contrary to the ways of God and God's love. Now, the Greek of the New Testament indicates that this is a brother or sister. You know, the translation that we use and that Annie read is a member of the church. The Greek is brother. That means a spiritual brother, a brother or sister in the faith. So that's who he's talking about. You're going from a brother or sister in the faith to a brother or sister in the faith. We do not have a command to go around correcting the moral behavior of individuals in the general population. That's not what this passage is about. This is to the church, for the church. And to go to someone and say, I have a problem, that goes back to love. The prophets of God, including Ezekiel, John the Baptist, they often gave warnings of unhappy judgments if the people of God did not amend their ways and come back to God. They brought a warning if one was needed. And you warn people that you care about them. When you love people, you care what happens to them. And you do not want them to continue down a path that will ultimately destroy them. Like the prophets, but in our own ways, with our own dynamics, we try to warn those we love who seem to be on a path of self-destruction, to wake them up, to bring them back. Jesus said, if the member listens to you, you have regained that one. You have won them back. That's what the sense is. You've won them back to the faith in this case. Mike Singletary warned Walter Payton because he loved him. He wanted the best for him to get his life back on track with God and his family. He thought as a fellow believer, it was within his purview to talk with him and try to correct him. Remembering Bruner's words, it goes back to love for the church, too. Well, in Matthew 5, some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. You know, this is the person who's offended going to the person who is believed to be the offender. In Matthew 5, Jesus has it the other way. Jesus tells the people if they were going to the altar and making an offering, and they remember that their brother or sister has something against them, that they are to go and be reconciled to that person before they make their gift at the altar. It's the other side. If the person has, oh, they're mad at me, they've got something against me, I'm the offender, I've got to make the first move. Here Jesus tells the offended person, the wounded one, to make the first move. If you are the hurt party, go to her or him. If Dick has sinned in such and such a way that Jane is hurt, she is not to stop coming to church and fade away. No, she is to confront Dick. Reconciliation can start with the wounded party making the first move, even if it goes against our instinct and our culture. Wherever Christians dishonor Jesus or neighbors, other Christians have responsibilities, not just an opportunity. It's a command, not an option. And Bruner reminds us of social theology, and he says this makes this confrontational responsibility clear in our time to be applied even socially. For example, he writes, Christian landowners who exploit their workers should be confronted. Church neutrality is not love. It can be theft or murder. Christian congregations will take up the cudgels for the abused in their community. And wherever Christians are living high-handedly and hurtfully above the law of God, this church will move into a carefully worked out confrontation with them, as this passage lays out. Now, how is this laid out? Well, the confrontation is to be done first in private. You and I and Jane are told to bring our concerns to the person in question, not to someone else. No gossip. The honor of the confronted person is guarded. In private confrontation and conversation, it may turn out that the confronter has misjudged. They don't know the whole story. Meeting with the person privately first is like the equivalent of innocent until proven guilty. This person deserves a private, prior conversation before talking with anyone else about your issue. The offender should be spoken with, not about. And if you go and you are rebuffed, do not quit, Jesus said, but bring one or two others and try again. Again, this is done out of love. Apparently Singletary quit. We don't know. You and I were not there. It could be an apocryphal story. And in our own situations, it would be easy for you or me to say, I tried to talk to him. It was hard. It took courage that I do not have, but I tried, and it didn't work, so I'm done. It's easy for you and I to say that, because the first move is difficult. But Jesus says, no, that's not the way of love. Church shouldn't give up so quickly, because God doesn't. This is not the only passage in the Bible about this. We heard the passage from Ezekiel, and hearing it again this morning kind of struck me again with the seriousness of what these issues can be and the responsibility. It commands the confrontation, but judges the confronter if he or she does not even try. And Paul, writing to the Galatians, said, "My friends, if anyone is detected in a transgression, you who have received the Spirit should restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness." Gentleness. Love is behind these attempts at reconciliation. Now, this second step Jesus mentions with bringing one or two others means patience. Things may work out. You or I are protecting the sinner against arbitrary and possibly emotionally delivered judgment or discipline. We exhaust the opportunities to reach out. Because maybe the person you've talked to, they've done some thinking since your first one-on-one, and they're coming around. Things are in place to right that, to correct that. And this second step can catch that, sparing everyone from the third congregational action, which acts for the good of the church. Now, if the person who is approached is unresponsive to these meetings, Jesus says give them a chance to listen to the whole community. They won't listen to you as an individual or to a couple of, to two or three of you. Maybe they'll listen to everyone. This sounds like a mass intervention. And interventions in the lives of addicts, for example, can save them where no previous conversations were enough. If even that does not bring about a change, if this third attempt to heal what has become wounding fails, then they are in effect leaving the community. Let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector, Jesus said. They dissociate from close fellowship. The person chooses to go his or her way, not the way of the community of faith. They excommunicate themselves. Now, this passage and the one from Ezekiel 33 reminds us that you and I are humans and are far from perfect. Sometimes we get involved in things that hurt others, maybe a bad witness. And sometimes we might not be aware of it or be aware of the damage done. Would we not want someone to reach out and say, "Hey, do you know what you're doing? You're hurting me. You're hurting the church. Do you need help? Tell me what's going on." Would we want someone to love us enough to privately come and bring to our attention and see what we can do to get right? For what is more important than the quality of our life with God, which directly shapes the quality of our life with everyone else? The love that confronts is an active love that honors, acts privately first, that doesn't quit. I think if this had been followed in the past, there might be persons who have left churches who would still be in those churches. Instead, somebody like Johnny Carson and quit the relationship. Or stop, like Singletary seemed to after one attempt. Or refuse to respond. May you and